This is part 2 of our summary series on obscured principles. If you haven't already, go back and read part 1. Chapter 7 is titled The Fractured Compass. And at the risk of stating the obvious, I think it's fair to say that all of us have an inner sense of right and wrong, good and bad, healthy and unhealthy. We follow certain paths and avoid others based on what feels instinctively correct. Yet despite this general guidance, most people end up making decisions they later regret, chasing goals that bring no lasting fulfillment, or ignoring subtle signs of danger until catastrophe strikes. So why do we so often lose our way? As Caine suggests, it may have less to do with a lack of wisdom and more to do with misplaced confidence. He opens with a piercing metaphor. Most people believe they are moving forward, but the truth is, they are spinning in place. Lost in the certainty of motion without purpose, think of a dog chasing its own tail. Caine draws a clear distinction between movement and direction. Going to school, for example, is movement. Graduating top of your class is direction. Getting rich, being famous, or marrying young are common examples of movement mistaken for direction. Because in each case, the goal was determined by others and imposed upon the individual. Caine suggests that when it comes to these sorts of decisions, there are two primary modes of operation. The first is borrowed. This describes most people. They inherit someone else's definition of success, happiness, or a fulfilling life and then chase it down. It's easier than charting one's own course, but inevitably leads to dead ends. Why? Because the destination belongs to someone else. By contrast, the second mode is earned. This involves finding the strength and wisdom to navigate independently. It's harder, messier, and often lonely, but it leads to a deeper kind of fulfillment. Unfortunately, according to Caine, most people never learn to navigate this way. Their inner compass is either broken or pointed in the wrong direction. But why would that be? Caine suggests that like the magnetic north used by sailors to calibrate their compasses, our own sense of right and wrong is influenced by invisible forces. Specifically, he cites 4: cultural norms, religious dogma, parental fears, and collective trauma. These forces combine to create a sort of inherited magnetic field that guides our behavior without our awareness. Even the soul can be misaligned when the magnet of fear is hidden beneath the floorboards of our upbringing. So while we might feel certain that we're following our instincts, what if those instincts were installed rather than innate? What if much of our behavior is driven not by free will, but by conditioning? Let me illustrate with some personal reflections. Growing up, my parents did everything right. We provided food, clothing, shelter, education, and most importantly, unconditional love. I could not have asked for more. And yet within that environment, I absorbed unspoken expectations about who I should be and how I should behave. My dad never told me to become an overachiever, yet I knew that anything less than excellence would disappoint him. My mom never said I couldn't date non-Jewish girls, yet I knew that she'd prefer I stick to my own kind. My teachers never explicitly encouraged me to put my hand up for every opportunity, yet I felt compelled to do so. All of these expectations were reasonable, even admirable. But the fact that they went largely unexpressed meant that I could never truly choose them freely. Instead, I acted in accordance with an image of myself that had been assembled unconsciously from bits of advice, gestures, winks, and reactions. Now, I'm not suggesting that what I learned was wrong. In fact, I credit much of my drive and ambition to these early influences. But I am saying that my internal compass was shaped by forces beyond my awareness. And this is precisely the point that Caine makes throughout this chapter. Our compass is calibrated in such a way that we never notice. The inherited magnetic field permeates our sense of identity, guiding our steps long before we've had a chance to make a decision. The problem is that this sort of unconscious calibration leaves us vulnerable to self-deception. We mistake borrowed expectations for genuine desires, and then spend years trying to reach destinations that don't belong to us. According to Caine, the average person remains blissfully unaware of this process. But every so often the inner compass breaks, and suddenly one finds oneself lost, confused, or uncertain of direction. In other words, having an existential crisis. The good news, says Caine, is that disorientation can also be a catalyst. There is a sacred violence in losing one's way. It is the undoing of false certainty, the rupture from autopilot. Imagine flying a plane on autopilot. For hours, everything seems fine, but suddenly the instruments fail and the pilot becomes disoriented. Now imagine the opposite. You take away the autopilot, and the pilot takes control manually. Everything is rough and shaky at first, but as the pilot adjusts, a new level of awareness and skill emerges. This is exactly what happens when the inner compass fractures. Disillusionment is not a setback, but the start of conscious navigation. I remember the first time I really felt lost. It was during my gap year between high school and university. I had always been a high achiever, but after getting into university, I realized that I didn't want to study medicine. That realization sent me into a tailspin. Suddenly, all of those years of studying, all of that parental pressure, all of that future planning seemed pointless. My entire future was called into question. It was terrifying. Looking back though, I can say that that period of disillusionment was also the greatest gift I could have received at the time. It forced me to abandon the autopilot, to wake up to the messiness and uncertainty of my situation. What followed was a long and painful process of rebuilding, but it eventually led me to the career, the relationship, and the life that I have now, which I can honestly say I never would have traded. In the rest of the chapter, Caine explores how to make the most of this fractured state, how to use it to rebuild a better, more authentic sense of self. His answer: recalibrate the inner compass through silence. In other words, through deep internal stillness. To quote Caine directly, the fractured compass can only be realigned in the hush beneath the stories. That's quite a poetic way to describe it, but I think it's accurate. See, the thing about mental illness is that it is never purely psychological. It affects our thoughts, yes, but also our feelings, behaviors, and deepest sense of meaning and value. In order to heal properly, we need to get to the root of the problem, which often lies in our unconscious assumptions about ourselves and the world. In the case of the inherited magnetic field, this means recognizing that much of our behavior is guided by forces beyond our awareness. That many of our most cherished beliefs and values were installed rather than innate. Once we realize this, we can begin the arduous process of deconstruction. According to Caine, this involves three things: time and solitude, a willingness to listen to the discomfort, and the courage to let old values crumble. When we allow ourselves to sit in the discomfort, something interesting happens. As Caine writes, truth has a sound. Listen closely and you will hear it. It's the whisper beneath the stories. Truth is not a voice that can be taught, only one that can arise. Dies. So how do we tune into this inner voice? Caine suggests that we begin by silencing the noise that surrounds us. This doesn't necessarily mean literally tuning out the physical world, but it does involve quieting the constant barrage of information and opinion that floods our minds. This creates space for something deeper to emerge. The author puts it poetically in the hush beneath the stories. The compass begins to twitch towards something older than doctrine, truth. What this truth looks like will vary from person to person, but one thing is certain: it will not point to safety. You see, safety is an illusion. True direction always leads us toward what is missing, what is unknown, what is uncomfortable, points toward healing. The fractured compass, according to Caine, is not a flaw, but the beginning of freedom. It allows us to break with tradition, to stop acting out of habit or duty, and to start acting out of choice and love. And that, dear friends, is the essence of this chapter, and indeed the entire book. If you enjoyed this summary, please leave us a like and a comment below. Stay tuned for more. Thank you.